Hello, I am your substitute teacher, Mr. Driver, because Mr. the Jobber is away at the zoo with his knob out. Put away your mobile phones and your Mr. Frosties, I don't care if he's such fun, and come with me as we grade WWE Extreme Rules 2018. So before we start with the main card, there was a lovely, very well produced opening package. Mr. Driver really appreciates production values, but Mr. Driver also appreciates substance. And this was lacking in substance. It was very pretty, but it was just full of nonsense millennial stuff, so it's getting a D. But anyway, on to the first match. We have the Deleters of Worlds versus the B Team. What a weird match to kick off the show, right? A lot of people were concerned that this was just going to be another one of the interchangeable adventures of the B Team versus Bray and Matt, but I'm quite happy to report that we were all quite pleasantly surprised. There were some great little moments throughout, including Matt Hardy repeatedly imploring Bray Wyatt to eat Bo Dallas, but it was quite slow in places, which is a little bit of a shame because we know that these guys individually are all capable of much higher paced matches. That being said though, it was a lot more of a direct encounter than the previous ones they'd had. Commentary really worked to put the B Team over and establish them as a credible team and a credible threat, but I'm going to give this match a C+ because while it wasn't the best storytelling match and it wasn't the best work rate match, the B Team defeated the Deleters of Worlds to become the Raw Tag Team Champions, the B Team. And that right there is why it went on first, C+. I'm not going to grade this moment, but we then return after the match backstage to see Kurt Angle delivering a 3-pronged ultimatum to Brock Lesnar. And the ultimatum is as follows. He either shows up to Raw tomorrow, he agrees with WWE the terms of his next title defense, or he'll be stripped of the Universal Championship. I wonder where they're going to go with this, but I think they're still going to try and push that rhetoric that Brock doesn't really care about the belt and that Roman is this sort of downtrodden people's wrestler, and I just don't see people getting on board with it. It is sort of hard though to get this idea of Roman being a people's guy over when really, you know, he's the company's guy. Everybody knows he's the company's guy. Everybody and their mom knows he's the company's guy. So I just guess we're going to have to tune into Raw, see what happens, but I'm worried that they're going to keep sort of pushing the Roman Brock thing. So next we move on to Finn Balor and Constable Corbin's first singles matchup, and commentary are hyping it as who's the bigger man, and they're sort of referring to this Twitter beef that the boys have been having for the last few weeks. Corbin was certainly the cockier of the pair going into the match, and he wrestled in a lovely dress shirt, proving that you don't really need expensive gear, you can just go out there looking like an extra in Scarface and have a great time. Corbin was also quite dominant during the kickoff of the match, which was quite nice because, you know, with the gimmick change, it's nice to have the idea that Baron Corbin could be a credible threat. Commentary also went off on one about combat sports and how if this was a combat sport with weight classes like all combat sports have, Baron Corbin would be able to knock out Finn Balor in one punch. I mean, I'm not running the show, but they're up there, they're in a ring, they're in their pants, they look like they're hitting each other. For all intents and purposes, wrestling, while it's also entertainment, it's sort of a combat sport. Why would you run it down and sort of make it so it's not as good as MMA? It's your own product, you've got to get it over. They also kept directing us to Ronda Rousey's Instagram, so there's also that. I was kind of disappointed in the lack of crowd reaction in this one, and I was going to give it a B-, but then Finn won by roll-up, and it just felt a bit sneaky really. It felt lucky or desperate. It didn't really feel like it was at Corbin's expense, like Corbin had made a mistake enabling the roll-up. So for that reason, I'm going to give it a C, and I mean, framing it in the context, the wider context of Extreme Rules, it was probably one of my favourite matches on the show, but yeah, I think it's worthy of a C. I'm not going to grade this one either because it's quite a short little backstage segment, but we go backstage, and Team Hell No are being mercilessly attacked by the Bludgeon Brothers. Kane is getting his leg smashed in with a hammer, and Daniel Bryan's being thrown about like a rag doll. We then move on to Asuka versus Carmella for the SmackDown Women's Championship. Ellsworth is suspended above the ring in a shark cage, and as we know in most shark cage matches, the suspended party will always try and drop something for their ally to use and get the upper hand during the match. And in this case, we had two foreign objects. Ellsworth tried to drop a chain at first. It was quickly spotted by the referee and discarded by Asuka. And then he tried to drop a cool spray bottle thing, and that again didn't quite go to plan. And then after exhausting all two of his options, James Ellsworth started to pick the lock of his cage, managed to get out, and then somehow got snagged on the cage, was dangling upside down for a bit, and then, health and safety sort of intervened and they had to lower him. Now, of course, when Asuka sees Ellsworth being lowered with his back exposed and all these health and safety people around him, it's sort of free real estate. She just wants to go to town on him, except she goes to kick his back, and I get that when you're hanging upside down, maybe you can't tense your back to take a kick properly, but he's wearing this massive kick pad on his back, and it just looked a bit sloppy. You could see the chain that he was hanging from. But you know, if you just ignore all that, it was quite entertaining. And then it just sort of got out of control, really. Like, Asuka keeps kicking Ellsworth, and then Carmella pops up from behind. She shoves Asuka into the cage, which has been lowered to like head height. Asuka bumps her head. Carmella rolls up. 1, 2, 3. Carmella retains. It was just a bit disappointing. We then just had this weird post-match segment where Asuka just started beating the crap out of Ellsworth, and it didn't really do anything to make her look strong. She was just sort of attacking him, and it was a bit hollow, really. So for this reason, I'm going to have to give it a D, and I'm really sorry, Asuka. I really wanted this to be your time, but I guess we're just going to have to wait. Next up, we go to Shinsuke Nakamura versus Jeff Hardy for the United States Championship. It's incredibly simple booking on this one, and I'm pretty sure that Ross will be able to confirm Shinsuke Nakamura's love for smashing in men's testicles with his bare hands. But we got to see it again firsthand when Nakamura low-blowed Hardy before the bell had even rang. And then as soon as the bell had rang, this was immediately followed up by a Kinshasa. 1, 2, 3, match done. Shinsuke Nakamura, new US champion. It was bewilderingly quick, and while I understand that Jeff's been working through some injuries recently and needs some time off to heal up and rehabilitate them, it just seemed a bit mental to have it over and done with that quickly. Still, the victory wasn't the only surprise here, as a returning Randy Orton, who we haven't seen since Backlash, came down to make a bit of a confrontation. Nakamura and Orton sort of stared each other down for a little bit before Orton just sort of turned heel and stomped Jeff Hardy out. Now, where this is going, I'm not quite sure, but Randy always works really well when his motives aren't very clear. He's sort of one of the best anti-hero style tweener figures in the business. So he could have been sending Nakamura a message, maybe he's putting everybody else on watch, maybe he's just gone a bit crazy, but we're going to find out, I'd imagine, this week on SmackDown. Oh, and this gets a B-. I just really enjoyed how quick it was, how brutal it was, and Nakamura's a champion now. Get it. So next up, we go to Braun Strowman versus Kevin Owens in a cage. So poor Kevin Owens has sort of just been thrown into this matchup despite Braun just bullying him mercilessly, but I bloody love cage matches, so let's jump in. Owens played the sort of perfect, almost cowardly heel in this one. As soon as the cage doors were closed, he was trying to scale it. Braun was pulling him down. Braun was screaming in his face, begging him to fight, calling him a coward. And Owens just came off as absolutely desperate to be anywhere but that cage, and so the dynamic worked really, really well. I know some people might have found them a bit hokey. I really enjoyed the handcuffs. We all knew where it was headed, but it just allowed Owens to sort of be a little bit more of a dick. He was able to be more taunting and boastful to Braun before, obviously, Braun snapped the chain. And I mean, Owens just crotch chopping and telling Braun to suck it. It's just everything I didn't realize I needed in my life. That being said, I was only going to give this a C because Braun cost himself the match. Now, I know that Braun's a bit of a monster and he shouldn't really care about wins and losses, but he should really care about wins and losses. He holds the Money in the Bank briefcase. He could have easily just thrown Owens into the ring and just scaled down himself and got the win. It didn't really make sense to me, but I understand that it's part of Braun's character that he just wants to cause sort of reckless destruction and do whatever the hell he wants. So I was going to give it a C, but given the sort of heinous fall that Owens went through and the excitement out of that moment, I think I'm going to jump it up to a B. Next up, we have Team Hell No versus the Bludgeon Brothers for the SmackDown Tag Team Championships. Following the vicious attack that happened earlier in the night, Bryan comes to the ring alone, and the Bludgies have an absolutely amazing time just ripping him in half. Bryan kept getting little pockets of offense in against Rowan and Harper, but he kept getting caught and pinned down, and he even managed to get the yes lock in on Harper, but Rowan made the save. And just as the Bludgeon Brothers sort of have Bryan tied up and they're ready to finish the match, out comes Kane with a massive boot on. Kane then helps clean house for a little bit, and then he can't quite hit the tombstone because of his leg injury. Bludgeon Brothers have a bit more of a beatdown, and then they finally pick up the win with the Doomsday device. Now, unfortunately, I'm going to give this match a D because I think it just felt a bit like a non-match. Kane just seemed to lumber around the ring on his return, and the crowd just didn't really seem into it, and then subsequently WWE have reported that Kane has a broken leg, so if he was supposed to be out there working on a broken leg, it just doesn't really make sense. But given that Kane's now apparently injured, I'm assuming this means the end of Team Hell No, and it'll probably mean that Daniel Bryan's back out as a lone gunman waiting for his next feud. Next up, it's the match that everybody was waiting for. Bobby Lashley versus Roman Reigns. The crowd had taken on a life of their own by this point of the night, and it's no surprise that amid all of the booing there was also some Rusev Day chants and some Roman sucks chants. Reigns got the upper hand early, and then came a lot of high-paced back and forth. The match eventually spilled out of the ring to the ringside area. There was some creative use of ring steps. Lashley was able to just throw Roman clean over the announce table and just sort of keep him grounded throughout the whole match. There was also a horrible tumble that Lashley took going over the top rope to the outside, but luckily he doesn't seem to have been injured by it. There were some solid near falls and reversals, including Lashley reversing a Superman punch turning it into a spine buster, and then of course there was the moment at the end of the match when Roman went for a spear but he was speared by Lashley, and Lashley picked up the pin. I was genuinely surprised by this one, so I'm going to give it a C+. I think there was a lot of negativity around this match coming into the event because of all the rumors that it was going to be headlining, and I think both men sort of proved themselves more than capable in handling the match. And I'm also excited to see where this is going to take Lashley. Is this going to set Lashley up for Brock? Are we going to see Brock Lashley? I'd really like to see that match for some reason. I don't know why, but I guess we're just gonna have to tune into Raw to find out. Next up, we have Alexa Bliss defending her Raw Women's Championship against Nia Jax in an Extreme Rules match. Natalya and Mickie James are both ringside for this match, and Mickie James is very quick to distract Nia as much as she can and attack her whenever she gets the chance. There were some interesting spots, including Nia press slamming Alexa into a garbage can, then Alexa picking up the lids of the garbage cans and using them to defend herself against Nia. There was also an awkward corner spot where a wedge chair kept coming loose, and it sort of led to this awkward sort of headfirst roll for Nia into the corner. It just didn't look right. But we can't forget that Ronda's at ringside, can we? No, because they've been telling us all night that she bought her own ticket and that we can follow her on Instagram. Alexa goes to attack Natty with a kendo stick, and Ronda's had enough. She jumps the barrier and she comes in and cleans house. Ronda then puts Mickie through an announce table before Mickie then gets back up and hits her with a kendo stick, taking her out. And then with some assistance from Mickie, Bliss hits Nia with a DDT onto a chair and she picks up the win. I'm gonna have to give this one a D. It just didn't really feel like it got out of first gear at all. It didn't really feel like it sort of reached that moment and got the momentum. The crowd didn't really seem engaged with it. They only seemed to really get on board when Ronda jumped the barricade, and I get that this is sort of a vehicle to set Ronda up, but it just needed to feel a little bit more, you know? Next up, we have Rusev versus AJ Styles for the WWE Championship. Second last. The WWE Championship on second last. But nevertheless, the crowd are obviously on their feet and interested in this one because you've got Rusev, who is over, very, 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 very over, and AJ Styles, who's possibly one of the best wrestlers, if not the best wrestler in the world right now. It was a bit of a slow build, but a very satisfying match. Rusev went straight after Styles out of the gate, and the pair worked together to sort of build this story about Rusev's leg being targeted and gradually worn down over the course of the match. The pair managed to keep a methodical and consistent pace to the build, and there was one point where Rusev couldn't lock in the accolade because he couldn't get the leverage on his leg, and that just felt really satisfying. Like, it felt like the storytelling was just sort of really hammered home with it, and it was done just so well. English would then get involved, removing a turnbuckle pad while the referee's back was turned, and then Rusev would be driven into that, and he would obviously lose the match. All in all, I think I'm going to give this one a B-. We couldn't really ask for more. Rusev came out of it looking really strong, and he didn't get buried, and that's all we can really ask for. And finally, we move on to our main event, which is Dolph Ziggler versus Seth Rollins in a 30-minute Iron Man match for the Intercontinental title. Ziggler, of course, had Drew McIntyre at ringside, and Drew would, of course, get involved. Rollins picked up the first pin after a buckle bomb, and then the match started to spill to ringside, and it's at this point that the Pittsburgh crowd decide to start counting down Royal Rumble style to the counter for the 30 minutes on the Titantron. Rollins then hits Ziggler with a stomp and a pin to make it 2-0, and then Drew just completely wigs out, gets in the ring, starts attacking Rollins. Referee then basically levies a DQ and gets Rollins an extra 4, so now it's 3-0. Drew then just sort of continues his assault on Rollins, but the referee doesn't feel like dishing out any more DQ points, and he just sort of ejects Drew from ringside. Ziggler then picks up a cheeky win over a completely wiped out Rollins to make it 3-1, and then immediately hits him with a super kick to make it 3-2. Rollins then tries to lay in some offense, then he gets hit with a zigzag, and now it's 3-3. The match then goes into complete desperation mode. Ziggler hits a roll up on Rollins, but he uses the ropes as leverage. Referee doesn't catch it. 4-3 Ziggler. Then everything just sort of slowed down until there were a few minutes to go, and Rollins evened it up to 4-4. Rollins then hits Ziggler with a super kick and a stomp, and he's about to make it 5-4, and time expires. So it's sort of a draw. And then just as Ziggler's sort of leaving up the ramp with his IC belt, Kurt Angle comes out, tells his hometown crowd that that's not happening and it's going to sudden death, directs Ziggler back to the ring, and then it all just goes a bit mental. So then quite quickly and confusingly, Drew somehow gets back to ringside, distracts Rollins, Ziggler rolls in, hits the zigzag, picks up the victory. We then go off the air with this sort of short, confusing, weird fade out on Rollins, and it just felt a bit flat. But you know, that isn't to take away from the match. I wouldn't say it's one of the best Iron Man matches of all time, but it's certainly one of the better stories that were told on the card, so for that reason I'm going to give it a B-. And finally, to grade the show in full, I think the only thing I can really do is give it a C. It just felt very general, run-of-the-mill, and as if the status quo hasn't really changed at all. For a show like Extreme Rules, we expect there to be extreme consequences, extreme fallout, and just extreme moments. And I just don't think it's come to that standard that fans have come to expect over the years. I'm not saying it was a bad show, it wasn't a bad show, it wasn't a good show, it was just very general. But nothing really stood out as a defining moment, nothing really felt like it was going against the grain, so yeah. C. And that's it for Extreme Rules Graded. I've been Sam from Cultaholic.com. You can follow me on Twitter here. You can follow all of us at Cultaholic. If you like what we do here at Cultaholic, you can check us out on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Cultaholic. And most importantly, don't ever forget to hit subscribe and join us.